All right, chat. LegalEagle made a video. I think he might be. We might actually stop calling him LegalEagle if this video is good. If this video is good, I promise to stop calling him LegalEagle. If the video sucks.
And deport a legal permanent resident because of First Amendment protected speech and protesting. I guess we've now reached the chapter of the authoritarian playbook that involves disappearing political dissidents. The Trump administration, seemingly annoyed by protests against Israel that spread across campuses since October 7th, has loudly threatened to crack down on the universities and their students, even to the point of deporting people on student visas who engage in acts of protest. And protesting, need I remind you, is one of the most protected forms of speech under the First Amendment. And yet this week, the Trump administration seemingly made good on that threat when ICE arrested Palestinian activist and former Columbia grad student Mahmoud Khalil and declared that his student visa was being revoked. But the administration failed to notice or didn't care that Mr. Khalil holds a green card. Yes, that's right. He's actually a legal permanent resident. No matter though, they arrested him anyway and then sent him on a seemingly wild voyage to potentially a legal jurisdiction that will be more friendly to the administration's deportation goals. The administration refused to explain why Mr. Khalil was being held, and for 5 days denied Mr. Khalil his right to talk with his attorney. This turn of events has sparked protests and rang every alarm bell that there is for students, free speech advocates, and everyone who cares about basic civil liberties. And at the time that we're filming this video, Mr. Khalil is still in custody in Louisiana pending deportation. So the question on everyone's mind is, can the government really just revoke permanent residency and deport someone for First Amendment protected speech? Now the situation is fluid, we don't know all the facts, but here's what we know. According to his court filings, on the evening of March 8th, Mahmoud Khalil arrived at his apartment building with his pregnant wife.
So one of my big criticisms of LegalEagle is that he's fundamentally, if you're a lawyer, you're a liberal, because you have this kind of reverence for institutions. You kind of believe in the stuff you're taught, right? And I think for a lot of people, at least for me, when I was in law school, I was like, oh yeah, this is vile. Like the entire time I was in law school, I was just like looking around at people and going like, wait a minute, you think this is good? And, you know, at a certain point, people, you know, the main ambition of people in law school is to get hired by big law. Big law is basically large law firms that pay high salaries. You work 80 hours a week, right? 60 to 80 hours a week. You have no life. You get paid a lot of money, but you're working for the most evil corporations in the planet. That's like the main fucking dream that many people have in law school, right? And it's like, disgusting. And the main, like, and how do people justify that to themselves? Well, they've created this mercenary philosophy, and this is what is inculcated in law school. A good lawyer is not someone who seeks justice. A good lawyer is someone who zealously defends their client, right? Justice has nothing to do with it. It's a game. You hit the random, you know, it's like random character select. Today you're defending a pedophile. What can you do to win the game? Oh, today you're defending a oil and gas company poisoning 100 kids. Oh, yay! Today you're defending a man with a workers' comp claim. Yay! Like, that's the game. The game is, can you zealously defend your client, no matter who they are? And to them, that is justice. Winning the game. Oh, this guy was a vicious wife beater who murdered his baby. How can you get him off? That's the game. And for me, I was just like, why is this system a good system? How does it help society for us not to find what the truth of the matter is, but rather to try to find legal, technical excuses to allow guilty people and guilty entities to avoid accountability for the harm they've caused. How does that even help the perpetrator of the harm? If you're a murderer, it's not good for you to get off scot-free because of a technicality. You're mentally ill. You need help. And this is the kind of shit I'm talking about. Like, to the average lawyer, what I'm saying is anathema. It's ridiculous. No. See, the best way to test the state is to do a adversarial case. And it's like, no, it's not. It absolutely is not. All that happens is people with resources overwhelm the state, and they get treated differently than people that don't have resources who are targeted by the state. It has nothing to do with testing. Like, all these cockamamie bullshit that people say, it's not true. Why not become a prosecutor then? Because the only type of people that are prosecutors are the people that are trying to win on their side, which is they're trying to get the most convictions they can, whether the person is guilty or not. If you're a prosecutor, you're judged on your conviction rate, not on your truth rate.
As they entered the Columbia University-owned student housing...
So you're an anti-public defender? No, I'm anti this system that we have. I'm anti the... Like, again, you've got liberal brain. You've got liberal brain, which is like, oh, Mike, you're against public defenders. No, I'm against an adversarial justice system. I'm against side A versus side B, and they're incentivized to have their side win. I'm against that. I think that's a bad system. Do you want an alternative? I mean, you can't imagine an alternative? You can't imagine a system that seeks truth, reconciliation, and better outcomes for society? You can't imagine a system of truth seekers where everyone is involved and interested, where anybody can contribute, where we seek rehabilitative justice, not punitive justice? You can't imagine a system where we try to help and repair harms and avoid future harms rather than an adversarial game of profit? Like, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I mean. Like, this is what socialist justice would be. Socialist legal system would be about achieving justice and remunerating harm and redressing grievances. It wouldn't be about one side trying to get a bonus for winning more cases. And I'm asking you to start thinking more radically and setting aside these liberal institutions that are not serving us.
Building, they were approached by 4 plainclothes officers
for the JFK files
who asked Mr. Khalil to confirm his identity. When he did so, they identified themselves as being with the Department of Homeland Security and said they were there to take him into custody. They also threatened to arrest his 8 months pregnant wife if she continued to remain at the scene. Mr. Khalil was able to make a call to his attorney, Amy Greer, who asked one of the ICE agents if they had a warrant. The agent claimed they did and informed Ms. Greer that the U.S. Department of State was revoking Mr. Khalil's student visa. Ms. Greer pointed out that Mr. Khalil isn't on a student visa. He's a lawful permanent resident with a green card. Mr. Khalil's wife provided the paperwork to confirm it, and the ICE agent seemed confused. They checked in with someone on the phone, then replied that the Department of State was revoking Mr. Khalil's green card too. ICE informed Ms. Greer that they would be detaining Mr. Khalil in Manhattan. When Mr. Khalil's wife asked the ICE agents for their names, contact information, and how to reach them, they refused to reply. They would not even provide the grounds for Mr. Khalil's detention. While Mr. Khalil was being held in Manhattan, Ms. Greer filed a habeas corpus petition challenging the legality of Mr. Khalil's detention on the grounds that it was a violation of the First and Fifth Amendments and several other laws. Ms. Greer argued that the government was retaliating against Mr. Mahmoud for his protected First Amendment activities, specifically his role in the pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University. Now, in the wake of the October 7th attack on Israel, Mahmoud Khalil became active in the Columbia University pro-Palestine movement. According to news reports, he did not participate in the encampments or building takeover, but did represent the voice of the protesters in conversations between the student protesters and the university's leadership. Mr. Khalil has said in earlier interviews that his engagement with the pro-Palestinian protests was partly inspired by his own family's history. He was born as a Palestinian refugee in Syria after his family was expelled from Palestine. In December of 2022, he arrived in the United States on a student visa to work on a master's degree at Columbia University. Later, he married a U.S. citizen and became a green card holding permanent resident. Now, a legal permanent resident, or LPR, is a foreign national granted permission to live and work in the United States. Generally, LPRs can live and work in America indefinitely as long as they don't commit any deportable offenses. Deportable offenses generally include committing crimes, immigration fraud, or engaging in actions that threaten national security. In recent months, Columbia University, under threats from Congress and the Trump administration, that we'll discuss later, launched an investigation of Mr. Khalil, claiming that he had helped organize an unauthorized protest.
An unauthorized marching event in which participants glorified Hamas's October 7th attack and played a substantial role in the circulation of social media posts criticizing Zionism. So what they're saying is he's responsible for what other people said? Did I see Michael Moore's post regarding this? No, I didn't. Isn't she like a super neoliberal? Oh, I remember that. No. Oh, fuck. I remember this now. She was the Castillo administration, which was like couped. She was like part of the coup.
Had played a substantial role in the circulation of social media posts that were anti-Zionist and discriminatory. There's not that much information about what Mr. Khalil said and did during the Columbia University protest, but he did act as the lead negotiator between the university and student groups who were pressuring the administration to divest from Israel. In an interview with CNN in April of 2024, he called for Columbia to divest from companies who supported Israel, and he participated in a sit-in at Barnard College the week before his arrest. So why this one guy out of tens of thousands of protesters? Well, Mr. Khalil had previously given media interviews about the protests and had been visible without a mask during them. But probably more importantly, in the weeks leading up to his arrest, Mr. Khalil became the target of pro-Israel activists online who accused him of supporting Hamas, encouraging students to join a, quote, pro-terror group on campus and being part of a conspiracy to distribute terrorist propaganda. And then a Twitter user demanded that he be deported and tagged Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Now, it doesn't really matter whether we agree or disagree with anything that Mr. Khalil said or is accused of saying. The First Amendment prohibits the government from censoring speech based on the viewpoint it expresses, and people generally have a right to say whatever they want, including speech that many people would find offensive and abhorrent. Just ask the Westboro Baptist Church. You might remember in 2011, the Supreme Court ruled that the church's protests at military funerals, which included offensive and hateful speech such as God hates gays and thank God for dead soldiers, was still protected speech. The court emphasized that even deeply offensive speech on public issues in public spaces is shielded from government restriction. Now, the Trump administration publicly claimed that Mr. Khalil's arrest is sanctioned by its executive order on additional measures to combat anti-Semitism. In this order, the administration professed that it has, quote, fought and will continue to fight anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. The White House went on to specifically threaten action against universities, stating that the Secretary of State, Secretary of Education, and Secretary of Homeland Security will make recommendations for, quote, familiarizing institutions of higher education with a list of supposedly illegal anti-Semitic student activities. Universities were then supposed to monitor student activities, report prohibited activities by non-US citizen students, and ensure that those reports led to deportations. In a related fact sheet, the White House proclaimed that it would deport Hamas sympathizers and revoke student visas, threatening to, quote, we will find you and we will deport you. And where Mr. Khalil is concerned, the government has been very clear that it's attacking the content of his speech. The White House posted,
and that, ladies and gentlemen, means the First Amendment does not exist. Period.
On Twitter about Mr. Khalil's arrest, saying, quote, Shalom Mahmoud. ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come. And DHS spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin wrote that Mr. Khalil was arrested in keeping with the executive order on anti-Semitism because he, quote, led activities aligned to Hamas, which is such a tell in this case. You know that if they had actual evidence apart from just speech, they absolutely would have included it in that press release. But DHS has not provided any information indicating that Khalil provided physical support to the terrorist group. And Secretary of State Rubio posted a story about Mr. Khalil's arrest, proclaiming that the administration would be revoking the visas and green cards of Hamas supporters so they can be deported. Trump himself posted citing his executive order and stating that his administration will apprehend and deport what he calls terrorist sympathizers on campus, and that he expects every one of America's colleges to comply with the administration's stated goal to do this. Trump accused Mr. Khalil and other Columbia students of being, quote, pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, and anti-American. On March 13th, students, including Mr. Khalil and advocates with the Council on American Islamic Relations, struck back against Congress's demands and Columbia's complicitness, filing a lawsuit to stop the university from sharing any more student information with Congress. In their lawsuit, the students argued that sharing student information with Congress would be a violation of the First Amendment, student privacy laws, and the university's contractual obligations to its students. The plaintiffs urged the court to issue an injunction against further information sharing, stating, quote, "This nation is seeing a new wave of repression by this Congress and this new administration that pose a great threat to the First Amendment, akin to the threat that McCarthyism and the broad overreach of the role of the House Un-American Activities Committee posed 50 years ago." That threat became even more real when the Trump administration attempted to familiarize Columbia University with its obligations under Trump's executive order on combating anti-Semitism by canceling $400 million in grants to the university, ostensibly because the school had failed to quell anti-Semitism on campus. And then the Trump Department of Education, led by the highly qualified educator Linda McMahon, threatened to lay the smackdown on 60 universities for supposedly anti-Semitism claims.
Thank you.
So it seems that the Trump administration is penalizing both students and universities for the content of their speech. Now, if the government is punishing you for First Amendment protected speech, you're going to want a great lawyer. The government will rely on a same provision is know that someone thousands call the phone number on free consultation. You need the Eagle team. So you might be wondering,
man, the lawyer. Yeah, you guys are really going to stop Trump.
At this point if the government can just spirit someone thousands of miles away from their home to revoke their green card. And like many things this administration has gotten up to in its first 2 months, the answer is no, that's probably not legal, but the Trump administration is going to try and do it anyway. Now, there are many different ways to obtain a green card, including winning the visa lottery, having a U.S. citizen parent or close family member sponsor you, or marrying a U.S. citizen. And generally, green card holders are permitted to stay in the U.S. permanently, but there are some circumstances where they can be removed. Now, the government has yet to file legal documents identifying the grounds for Khalil's deportation, but we know they're probably not relying on the terrorism-related provisions. Instead, Secretary Rubio's comments suggest the government will rely on a more obscure and vague provision in the Immigration and Nationality Act, 8 U.S.C. 1227. Now that statute states, quote, "An alien whose presence or activities in the United States the Secretary of State has reasonable ground to believe would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States is deportable." Now, under that same provision, though, an immigrant cannot be excluded based on beliefs, statements, or associations that would be lawful within the United States unless the Secretary of State personally determines that the immigrant's admission would, quote, "compromise a compelling United States foreign policy interest." Now, Secretary Rubio seems to have made that determination. Under what due process, we have no idea, and of which we are very skeptical. And that would seem to give the government a lawful, though potentially not constitutional basis for Khalil's removal. The government may try to simply characterize Mr. Khalil's behavior as criminal. The government hasn't identified any particular behavior as criminal, and obviously speech alone is not criminal under almost all circumstances. But under the INA, an alien is deportable if they have been convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude or a felony. However, under 8 U.S.C. section 1182, Rubio is required to notify Congress about his determination. We don't know if Rubio has done this yet, and based on his comments, it seems that Rubio might be compiling a list of green card holders to give to Congress. But Khalil is likely to challenge the constitutionality of section 1227. Others have challenged this provision for being constitutionally overbroad. In one of the few cases dealing with the constitutionality of this provision, a case called Masu versus Reno, the judge, and I kid you not, the judge was Marianne Trump Berry, President Trump's older sister. The judge issued a blistering rebuke of the provision, stating that, quote, "The statute represents a breathtaking departure both from well-established legal precedent, which commands deportation based on adjudications of defined impermissible conduct by the alien in the United States, and from well-established precedent with respect to extradition, which commands extradition based on adjudications of probable cause to believe that the alien has engaged in defined impermissible conduct elsewhere." Masu was a Mexican national who legally resided in the United States, and Mexico sought to extradite him for convoluted reasons that Judge Trump Berry described as truly Kafkaesque. She addressed the central question, which is whether the language of section 1227 actually contains a recognizable legal standard. Could a green card holder look at the statute and figure out what conduct is deportable? Because all it says is the Secretary of State must conclude that the immigrant's presence would have, quote, "potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States." So Trump Judge Berry wrote, quote, "While there may be a common understanding in a definitional sense of what foreign policy is, no one outside the Department of State, and perhaps the president, ever knows what our nation's frequent covert foreign policy is at any given time. Thus, there is no conceivable way that an alien could know ex ante how to conform his or her activities to the requirements of the law.
And that in the essence of why Donald Trump is a fascist, and why Marco Rubio is a fascist, and why we are already, this is crossing the Rubicon. This is the moment. What are you going to do about it? And every single day, I sit back and I think, and I realize that we are ending the period of time where speech alone, or talking alone, or organizing or protesting alone is going to be enough. I don't know what that means. That's as far as I can take you. As a public figure, that's as far as I can take you. Is to say, the government has basically departed from any kind of law. What this is saying, what the position of the Trump administration officially is if we don't like you, we will deport you. This is a physical threat. This is violence by the state against political opposition because they're political opposition. This is the law protects them and punishes you. Punishes you for what? Your opinions, your thoughts, your beliefs. This is totalitarianism, not just authoritarian. This is totalitarian. This is the state must dominate your thoughts.
Of course, it is even less likely that an alien could know that his or her mere presence here would or could cause adverse foreign policy consequences when our foreign policy is unpublished, ever-changing, and often highly confidential. And the judge held that that statute is unconstitutionally vague and that it violated the Fifth Amendment right to due process. And as the judge ruled, all Masoud did was criticize the Mexican government, which had no conceivable impact on U.S. foreign policy. However, the government appealed, claiming that the plaintiff had failed to exhaust his administrative remedies. The appeals court agreed, and then in an opinion written by, I kid you not, then Judge Samuel Alito, stated that it would not adjudicate the constitutional merits because Mr. Masoud had to first go through the administrative process. And now the constitutionality of this provision has not been considered since. So it's likely that Khalil could challenge the statute on free speech grounds. The government is arguably retaliating against him by arresting and potentially deporting him in response to his participation in protected speech. Generally, the First Amendment does not distinguish between citizens and non-citizens, meaning that the government cannot punish a non-citizen for speech it could not punish a citizen for. However, courts have taken a more nuanced approach when it comes to the government's ability to deport non-citizens based on their political affiliation in speech. In the McCarthy-era case of Harisiades versus Shaughnessy, the Supreme Court upheld the deportation of several immigrants who were Communist Party members, reasoning that endorsing communism was inherently an endorsement of violent revolution. The court drew a legal distinction between advocating change through lawful democratic means and advocating change through force, concluding that the Communist Party membership necessarily involved the latter, though I'm skeptical that that reasoning would be upheld under current jurisprudence. In contrast, the 1945 case of Bridges versus Wixon took a more protective stance, affirming that the First Amendment does not include exceptions for deportation laws, thereby defending the free speech rights of resident aliens. In that case, Harry Bridges was an Australian-born Labour leader accused of being a communist. The government argued that his alleged communism ties made him ineligible to remain in the US. The court said that the mere association with a political ideology without evidence of unlawful action was not grounds for removal. The decision emphasized the importance of protecting free speech and political expression, even for non-citizens. But even if the administration wants to deport Mr. Khalil under this provision, and even if it can cite a compelling foreign policy interest, and even if it can overcome legitimate concerns about constitutional problems of the provision, Mr. Khalil is still entitled to due process under the Immigration and Nationality Act. He must receive notice regarding the legal and factual grounds for his removal, and must be given a hearing before an immigration court. In these proceedings, Mr. Khalil will be
That's why we need Bernie Sanders to start a new party.
entitled to an attorney.
I know that, obviously he's shown no sign that he's going to do it, but we need somebody like that, somebody with that level of national prominence to start a new party, or it's just not going to go anywhere. Like, that's, maybe it won't be Bernie, maybe it'll be somebody else, but we need a new party. Like, the Democratic Party hates the left, and they will destroy the left. It's pointless to stick with them. They're coming for you. They're going to help the Republicans. You supporting the Democratic Party is supporting your own demise. You're putting the gun in your murderer's hand.
Must be permitted to see and refute the evidence against him, and must be allowed to cross-examine witnesses and make his case. The government will then have to prove by clear and convincing evidence that there are legal grounds to deport him. Though generally it is permissible for the government to detain an immigrant while their removal is pending. Now, Mr. Khalil's attorney, Amy Greer, immediately petitioned for a writ of habeas corpus in the Southern District of New York, where Mr. Khalil was being held. A habeas petition is a procedure under which the federal court can review the legality of a person's incarceration. It means literally you have to produce the body. And it allows a court to order the law enforcement authorities bring the incarcerated person before the court and explain the basis for their detention. This was the framers' main tool to prevent being arrested without any explanation and being held without trial or formal charges being filed. So in his motion for a writ of habeas corpus, Mr. Khalil, the plaintiff, argued that his detention is unlawful because it's a violation of his First and Fifth Amendments. Because it's a violation of his First and Fifth Amendment rights, the Immigration and Nationality Act, and the Administrative Procedure Act. The motion focused primarily on his First Amendment claims, arguing that Mr. Khalil was being detained and potentially deported in retaliation for his First Amendment protected speech regarding the conflict between Israel and Palestine. He argued that there is, quote, a substantial causal connection between Mr. Khalil's protected speech and respondents' adverse actions and threats. Plaintiff argued that because of these violations, he's entitled to relief from that court. Specifically, the plaintiff argued that the Southern District of New York should assume jurisdiction over this matter, where he resides and apparently where he was when the motion for habeas corpus was filed, before he was effectively renditioned to Louisiana. And he argues that the court should declare that the government's actions violated the First Amendment and the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment, order the release of Mr. Khalil under reasonable supervision, and enjoin the government from transferring Mr. Khalil out of the jurisdiction while the proceedings are pending. Seemingly in response to Mr. Khalil's request that the court enjoin the government from transferring him out of the jurisdiction, and miraculously, Mr. Khalil's lawyer filed that motion at about 3 o'clock in the morning the night that he was arrested. Now, in response to Mr. Khalil's request that the court enjoin the government from transferring him out of the jurisdiction, the Trump administration sent Mr. Khalil 1,000 miles away to Louisiana, effectively separating him from his 8 months pregnant wife, his attorney, and the Southern District of New York. Mr. Khalil's attorney said that when she called the Louisiana office to try to arrange a telephonic meeting with her client, the earliest date she was offered was 10 days out. Louisiana also appears to be the government's favorite dumping ground for immigrants going through removal proceedings. In February, the Department of Defense moved migrants waiting for removal from Guantanamo Bay to the same processing facility in Louisiana, which was why Mr. Khalil's attorney promptly filed a motion to compel his return to the Southern District of New York under the All Writs Act. So far, Judge Jesse Furman is allowing the case to move forward. He hasn't yet granted the plaintiff's request that Mr. Khalil be returned to New York, but he did order the government not to deport Mr. Khalil while the case is being considered. In a joint letter filed on March 11th, the parties asked for further briefing on the issue. Unsurprisingly, the government is using Mr. Khalil's detainment in New Jersey.
No party is going to be our panacea, our salvation. Without an international revolutionary party, we cannot do anything, and that party already exists, so get organized. I mean, the problem that you have is that you just don't understand how people think. That's your problem, right? That's your problem. You underestimate the importance of charismatic leadership. There's different types of leadership. There's different types of credibility. And just making rational arguments is not enough. I'm sorry that you don't get that because you are probably autistic like me. And you think, well, as long as I just make factual sense and I make logical arguments, then people will be persuaded. That is not how people work. People are social animals, and they require validation from socially trusted individuals. In order for a party to form, you have to have individuals that people are charismatically attracted to. It has always been about that. Always been about that. If you don't understand that, then you are a fucking idiot. And yes, I think organizing is very important, but I'm trying to find, just look at what happens, man. When it's successful, you need to have somebody we can rally around who people trust. Especially in the United States of America. Do you understand the amount of state oppression that's focused on people like you? I don't think you get it. You don't have the space to operate.
A lot of people responded to the anguish. I appreciate it. I wake up 3 in the morning sometimes, so worried about the future of the country under these oligarchs or or whatever, or, you know, oligarchs, I guess.
Yes.
And but so a lot of people responded to the anguish. I appreciate it. I wake up 3 in the morning sometimes, so worried about the future of the country under these oligarchs or or whatever, or, you know, oligarchs.
Like, look at this. This is your leader? This is your leader?
Jersey and then Louisiana to destroy the Southern District of New York court's ability to hear the case and ask the court not to rule on returning Mr. Khalil to New York until the court has decided about the jurisdiction and venue questions. The court agreed to allow the government to file its motion to transfer or dismiss for improper venue before the court adjudicates the motion for writ of habeas corpus and the motion to return Mr. Khalil to New York under the All Writs Act. And on March 12th, the government filed its motion to dismiss or to transfer the case, arguing that by the time that Mr. Khalil's attorney filed the habeas motion on his behalf, he was already in New Jersey. So therefore, the Southern District of New York has no jurisdiction over the case because a habeas petitioner has to file the petition in the district in which he is confined. Thus, the government argued that the case ought to be either transferred to the Western District of Louisiana, where rights seem to be a little more discretionary, or dismissed entirely. Though it's worth pointing out that the government doesn't dispute in its filing that Mr. Khalil's attorney had good reason to believe that he was still being held in New York when she filed the petition on his behalf. Indeed, the government concedes that it was ICE's own statements and own tracking website that indicated he was still being held in New York at the time. Meanwhile, Mr. Khalil is still being detained in Louisiana. Mr. Khalil's attorneys have now filed an amended petition for habeas corpus on his behalf, expounding on their claims of First and Fifth Amendment violations and violations of the Administrative Procedure Act's prohibition on arbitrary and capricious government actions. Plaintiff's amended petition lays out a comprehensive list of Trump administration statements that illustrate a clear intent to chill legitimate free speech with a policy of deportation under the obscure and vague foreign policy provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Likely because of the court's prior order, Mr. Khalil's attorney was finally able to reach him to discuss the deplorable conditions of his detainment, which, as described in plaintiff's filings, include being shackled as he was whisked across jurisdictions, being denied necessary daily doctor-prescribed medication, and being housed in a, quote, bunker without a pillow or blanket. It also appears that Mr. Khalil might have been taken back to New York after he was taken to New Jersey, which would negate a lot of the jurisdiction arguments, but we'll see. But in light of the unlawfulness and harsh conditions of Mr. Khalil's detention, his attorneys have asked for him to be released on bail pending the adjudication of his immigration status. The judge will likely rule on the parties' motions next week. And as his wife has pointed out in her public statements, their first child is due in April, a birth he's likely to miss unless the court decides to intervene on his behalf. And one of the many deeply troubling things about Khalil's story,
Fred Hampton stays eternally relevant.
Black people need some peace. White people need some peace. And we are going to have to fight. We're going to have to struggle. We're going to have to struggle relentlessly to bring about some peace, because the people that we're asking for peace, they're a bunch of megalomaniac warmongers, and they don't even understand what peace means. And we've got to fight them. We've got to struggle with them to make them understand what peace means. Is going through all types of physical and mental torture. But that's all right, because we said even before this happened, and we're going to say it after this, and after I'm locked up, and after everybody's locked up, that you can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail a revolution. Right. You might run a liberator like Harris Cleave out the country, but you can't run liberation out the country. You might murder a freedom fighter like Bobby Hutton, but you can't murder freedom fighting. And if you do, you come up with answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain. You come up with conclusions that don't conclude. And you come up with people that you thought should be acting like pigs, that's acting like people and moving on pigs. And that's what we've got to do. So we're going to see about Bobby, regardless of what these people think we should do. Because school is not important and work is not important. Nothing's more important than stopping fascism, because fascism will stop us all.
is how much the internet played a role in punishing Khalil's speech. It seems that online vigilantes hunted him until their social media posts caught the attention of Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But it is darkly fascinating to see how the media has covered all of this. When ICE arrested Mr. Khalil, 374 news sources covered it, with 30% of the coverage coming from the left, 45% from the center, and only 25% from the right. And when you examine the headlines, you see some very different framings emerge that shape how readers interpret and understand the events that are unfolding. On the right, the most common theme is to emphasize that Khalil and his protesters are pro-Palestine or even pro-Hamas. as we've seen here. On the left, headlines stress that Khalil is a green card holder, which draws attention to the thorny legal questions that we've discussed here. And then from the center, nearly every headline uses the word arrests, which speaks to an implied accusation of an alleged crime that may have occurred, or may not have occurred. But the headlines you read first have immense power to shape how you understand the news. And that's why I like to see the news from as many angles as I can, which I can with the help of today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. And right now they're offering LegalEagle viewers 40% off their unlimited access Vantage subscription. You can scan the QR code or use the link in the description to get a discount for a limited time. But Ground News gathers related articles from around the world and across the political spectrum, so you can save 40% off.
I told Dad, I said to him, you got to reduce the number of casualties, make sure aid gets in. There's a difficulty. Hamas has a different way of waging warfare, of using innocent Gazans as human shields. They put rocket in hospitals. They put military supplies in schools. What is the country supposed to do when rockets are being fired from a school? Supreme Court Chief Justice rebukes Trump over call to impeach judge in deportation case. President Donald Trump called for the impeachment of a judge who issued orders blocking the president's plan to deport alleged members of a Venezuelan gang from the United States. Impeachment is not an appropriate response to a disagreement concerning a judicial decision.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to do that, but it's still socially acceptable to shoot a missile in the general direction of somebody you're upset with. You're like, dude, there was like kids over there. This is my favorite response. Well, you know, they're using kids as human shields. It's like, well, you got to work around that. Jesus Christ, if I'm mad at my neighbor and I want to beat the shit out of him, but he's holding a baby, right? I wouldn't come in and try to punch him through the baby. Yeah, you go in, you know, you throw a hook. You sweep the legs. You do it on the lawn so the baby bounces off the grass, all right? There's fucking rules to this shit.